A music festival can do things that normal concerts cannot, such as explore an entire genre. The 2016 Beethoven Fest in Bonn devoted a complete day to Bagatelles for piano. And a whole weekend to piano trios. I'm Rick Folker with highlights from both in this Deutsche Welle Festival concert, Bagatelles by Beethoven and others, and Schubert's wonderful E-flat piano trio. What's in a name? Before we begin with selections from our day of Bagatelles, let's see what Webster's Dictionary has to say about the term. Something of little importance or value. Trifle is the definition. But there's no reason to tune this program out, I can assure you. Another definition offered is a short musical composition, especially for the piano. There we're getting closer to the matter. And with these short musical compositions for piano coming from the pen of Ludwig van Beethoven, you can be assured that these are no trifles. So why did he call them that? Says Ben Cruchley, it might have been an early 19th century marketing strategy.
It was interesting to reflect on the implications of the word bagatelle, and when a composer calls their work a trifle, what are they actually trying to say? Because it's much more contained than just simply designating and denigrating one of your own works. It's like saying, oh, don't look, there's nothing to see. No, nothing to see here.
Canadian Ben Cruchley was one of 4 pianists to present Bagatelles old and new at the Beethoven Fest. When Beethoven wrote piano compositions and called them Bagatelles, he was sort of championing the underdog and making a musical mountain out of a molehill, says pianist Ben Cruchley.
I think that there's almost a kind of a false modesty in the title, especially when we're talking about Beethoven's Bagatelles. And this was a theme in Beethoven's writing in his works, that he would act as a kind of champion for anything perceived of as little or insignificant. He could make something so enormous out of something considered so banal.
So which are Ben's Bagatelles? The collection he plays is a rather curious one.
Opus 119 is a very interesting composition because there are 11 Bagatelles, and we know that 5 of them were written around 1802 or 1803, and the other 6 were written 20 years later. I'm not sure if we're 100% sure which are the 5 and which are the 6. I believe it's the first 5 come from the early group, and the last 6 from the other. But there are lots of questions about this piece, and it has a very bizarre publication history. We don't know if the piece was meant to be performed as a whole, or if they were just meant to be studied individually as pieces. But for me, is the most interesting is that they're made up of works that were written from 2 very different parts of his life, 2 different styles. And so that he had no problem, let's say, to put them together into one work says a lot about his aesthetics, about his idea of what his works meant and how they could be interacted with.
We'll hear pianist Ben Cruchley's interaction with Beethoven's Opus 119 now in the form of 11 Bagatelles at the Beethoven Fest. 11 Bagatelles, Opus 119 by Ludwig van Beethoven, performed in the elegant black marble-clad chamber music hall of the Beethoven House in Bonn, Germany, just feet from the little room where Ludwig van Beethoven was born. And we can be fairly certain that Beethoven wasn't turning over in his grave in Vienna at that performance by Canadian pianist Ben Cruchley. The structure of Beethoven's music, its forward thrust, its power and precision-crafted quality intimidates some musicians, but not Ben Cruchley.
I personally find that Beethoven is one of the most ethical composers, that he really wants to communicate and he really wants to touch people, and the sincerity with which he does that and the positivity, I think, of the underlying message in his music, even in the most dramatic and tragic works of his. I think it's still something overwhelmingly affirming. And so that makes it perhaps even easier for me to approach than certain other composers, because you understand more clearly why you're doing it.
Maybe we understand Beethoven more clearly than he was understood in his time, because his music was very adventurous, very unconventional in some ways, and it offended some people. Do you think that he quite well expected to be heard 250 years later?
Yes, to a certain extent we are aware of the expectations, the realizations he had about the works he was writing, particularly towards the end of his life. Some of the decisions he made with negotiations with publishers relative to the value of his pieces imply that he knew that the material worth of these works in 1820s Vienna was one consideration, but the intrinsic value of the works was something else. So yeah, I think he was aware of the importance of what he was doing.
Beethoven wrote the best-known Bagatelles, and when later composers did the same, they were often referring back to Beethoven in one way or another.